Nobody saw it coming. One week, Caitlin Clark was standing at the top of the basketball world, freshly crowned, celebrated, and positioned to headline the biggest weekend in women's basketball. The next week, she was gone. Not traded, not benched, not involved in any drama, just gone from the spotlight she had spent years earning. And in the silence she left behind, two of her closest teammates did something that stopped the entire league in its tracks. This is not just a story about an injury. This is about what happens when the cameras stop rolling, when the crowd goes quiet, and when the people who actually know you show up anyway. This is about Caitlin Clark, Lexie Hull, Sophie Cunningham, and the kind of friendship that doesn't show up on any stat sheet. But to understand why this moment hits so differently, you first have to understand exactly how high the stakes were. Indianapolis in mid-July 2026 was electric. The city had been preparing for WNBA All-Star Weekend for months. Banners lining the streets, hotels sold out weeks in advance, and right in the center of it all, Caitlin Clark's face. She was everywhere, on billboards, on merchandise, on the lips of every sports commentator who had a microphone. The city wasn't just hosting a basketball event, it was hosting a moment, and Clark was the reason for all of it. At barely 23 years old, she had already rewritten the rules of what a young player could accomplish in this league. Her entry into the WNBA hadn't been a slow build, it had been an explosion. From her record-shattering college career at Iowa, where she had made an entire nation sit up and pay attention to women's basketball in a way it hadn't in decades, to her immediate professional impact the moment she stepped onto an NBA-caliber court in a Fever uniform, Clark had never done anything quietly. She was the kind of player you leaned forward. Sharp passes, fearless pull-up threes, a court vision that seemed almost unfair for someone her age. But more than the technical brilliance, there was something in the way she carried herself, a competitiveness that pulled you in, a presence that made every game feel like it mattered more than the one before it. By the time WNBA All-Star Weekend arrived on the calendar, Clark had already secured her place as the face of the Indiana Fever. And in early July, she made it official in the most public way possible, winning the 2026 ESPN WNBA Player of the Year award, one of the youngest players ever to take that honor. Breanna Stewart had it, A'ja Wilson had it, and now Caitlin Clark had it too. That wasn't just recognition, that was a statement. The league had a new standard, and she was setting it. All-Star Weekend was supposed to be the celebration, the three-point contest, the league showcase, her home crowd roaring in Indianapolis. It was practically written for her. And then, in a matter of days, everything unraveled. It didn't happen with a loud crack or a dramatic fall. That's what made it so unsettling. During a tough game against the New York Liberty, people watching closely started to notice something was off. Clark was moving differently, less explosive off the dribble, favoring one side, and at one point visibly clutching her lower body as she made her way toward the bench. The expression on her face wasn't of frustration or exhaustion, it was pain. She had been managing a groin injury quietly for weeks. That much became clear quickly. Athletes do that. They play through things the public never hears about, grinding through discomfort because the alternative is sitting out and watching. But this time, the injury had other plans. What had been manageable suddenly wasn't, and the escalation was fast. Coach Stephanie White addressed reporters with the standard assurances: thorough evaluation, careful monitoring, decisions made with the player's health first. But the basketball world sensed something was coming. When a player of Clark's magnitude starts moving like that, the news rarely lands softly. On July 17th, it landed. Caitlin Clark posted a statement that was brief, sincere, and almost understated given the magnitude of what she was announcing. She was withdrawing fully from All-Star Weekend. No three-point contest, no All-Star game, no moment under the stadium lights in front of the Indianapolis crowd that had been counting down the days.
She expressed her disappointment openly, told her followers that her health had to come first, and made one thing clear even through the hurt: she would still be there, not on the court, but in the stands, cheering with everything she had.
It was a mature decision, a painful one, and the timing made it sting even more. Days after one of the greatest individual honors of her career, she was stepping back from the biggest stage she'd ever been given. That kind of whiplash doesn't just affect a player, it ripples through an entire organization. When Clark's withdrawal became official, the WNBA needed a replacement for the three-point contest. They didn't have to search long. Lexie Hull had been putting together one of the most efficient offensive seasons of her career. While the headlines and camera time gravitated toward Clark, as they almost always did, Hull had been doing something methodical and relentless from behind the arc. Her three-point shooting percentage was hovering around 49%. To put that in perspective, that number would be elite by any standard in any era of basketball. Coaches knew what they had. Hull was ready. But here's what the bracket and the selection announcement didn't capture. When Lexie Hull got the call to step into Clark's spot, she was already carrying something heavy. Just days before All-Star Weekend, Hull had lost Maggie, her dog of 14 years. And if you've never had a pet that's been with you through every major chapter of your life, it's difficult to fully explain what that kind of loss feels like. Maggie hadn't just been a pet, she'd been a constant. Through high school finals, through the grinding uncertainty of college ball, through the early nerves and adjustments of life as a professional athlete, Maggie had been there. That kind of presence doesn't just disappear quietly, it leaves a silence that follows you into every room. Hull posted about it on social media, black and white photos of the two of them, and a caption that was short but said everything. Without you, the cutest Mag's house would not be the same. It was simple, honest, and completely human. The kind of post that doesn't perform grief, it just shares it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Fans flooded the comments with support. Teammates reached out. But in the middle of thousands of messages, two responses rose above the noise. Caitlin Clark, love you. Sophie Cunningham, no Lex, I'm sorry. 4 words between them, that's it. And yet, those 4 words told the whole story. There's a version of professional sports that gets sold to the public. The polished press conference answers, the rehearsed post-game interviews, the carefully managed social media presence. And then there's what actually happens between teammates when the cameras are off and the stakes are real. What Clark and Cunningham showed in those 2 responses wasn't performed. It wasn't for the cameras. It was just 2 people showing up for their friend the only way they could in that moment, with honesty and love. That's the kind of thing that doesn't develop overnight. You don't get that level of intimacy from a few months of sharing a locker room. That kind of connection gets built in the in-between moments. The long road trips, the post-practice conversations that run longer than they were supposed to, the quiet check-ins that happen when someone looks like they're carrying something they haven't said out loud yet. Hull and Clark's relationship had that quality. There was a comfort between them that fans noticed long before any of this. The way they moved around each other on the court with an almost instinctual awareness. The way Hull would find Clark without having to look. The way Clark trusted Hull's shot in moments where that trust needed to be earned first. Off the court, it was the same energy, real, unpretentious, and consistent. And then there was Sophie Cunningham, who by almost every account was the emotional engine holding all of it together. If you follow the Indiana Fever closely, you know that Sophie Cunningham occupies a particular space on this team. She's not the flashiest player, she's not the one the highlight reels are built around, but anyone who has watched this team with any degree of attention understands that she is essential, not just as a defender or as a contributor on the court, but as a human presence that sets the tone for everything around her. Her reputation for fierce loyalty had already made waves earlier in the season. When Caitlin Clark took a hard hit during a game, the kind of play where you look to the referee and find nobody moving, it was Cunningham who reacted first. No hesitation, no calculation, just an immediate full commitment response to someone going after her teammate. The league fined her for it. The fans made her a folk hero for it. because what they saw wasn't recklessness, it was devotion. There's a meaningful difference.
But Cunningham's most important contributions have rarely been the ones that generate fines or viral moments. They've been quieter than that. In the difficult days following Maggie's passing, Cunningham wrapped herself around Lexie Hull in the way that only someone with genuine emotional intelligence can. She didn't flood her with words, she didn't make it about herself or turn it into a public display. She just stayed close, at practice, on the sidelines, through private messages that Hull has hinted carried more weight than she'll fully say publicly. Cunningham created a buffer between Hull and the noise, making sure that when Hull stepped into the All-Star spotlight to replace Clark, she wasn't doing it alone. That is a skill that nobody scouts for and nobody signs a player because of, but it might be the most valuable thing Cunningham brings to Indiana. Somewhere along the way, fans started calling them Leches. The nickname was light and playful at first, a nod to the beloved dessert, a way to capture the flavor of three very different personalities that somehow blended into something greater than any one of them individually. Lexie Hull, the quiet warrior, grinding out efficiency with her head down and her shot dialed in. Sophie Cunningham, the courageous guardian, fierce and loyal and completely unbothered by what anyone outside that locker room thinks of her. And Caitlin Clark, the exploding star whose gravity pulls everyone around her into a different orbit. Three flavors, one thing that works because of how they fit together, not in spite of their differences. Cunningham leaned into it completely. She wasn't just comfortable with the nickname, she embraced it. At one point, she had a personalized jersey made with cartoon representations of the three of them on it. That's not the behavior of someone performing for an audience. That's genuine joy. And that kind of genuine joy is contagious in a locker room. The Leches merchandise, particularly Cunningham's tea line, sold out in hours, not because of any celebrity endorsement or aggressive marketing campaign. It sold because people could feel what it represented: loyalty, laughter, the kind of friendship that holds up under pressure. People wanted to be part of something that real. The social media presence around the trio became its own phenomenon. Fan art, highlight edits, commentary threads breaking down the little moments between them that most casual viewers would miss. A shared glance during a timeout, a shoulder squeeze before tip-off. The way Cunningham positions herself near Hull during warm-ups, close enough to be a presence without making it a moment. None of that was scripted, all of it was felt. What this trio did for Indiana's locker room culture is harder to quantify, but impossible to overlook. Before Cunningham's arrival, the Fever were talented and unformed, a group of skilled athletes still searching for identity, still figuring out the rhythms and the relationships that separate a collection of players from an actual team. That process takes time under the best circumstances. It takes the right people to accelerate it. Cunningham accelerated it, not through motivational speeches or veteran posturing, through consistency. She arrived early. She checked in on people without being asked. She introduced the kind of inside jokes that become shorthand for belonging. She shared what she'd learned without making anyone feel like a student. Slowly, the edges of a disjointed roster started to soften and connect. And Lexie Hull's emergence tracked that shift almost exactly. The player who had once been categorized as a useful role contributor became something considerably more. A weapon that opponents had to actively game plan for. A shooter whose confidence had clearly been cultivated by an environment that made her feel seen. Her 49% clip from three wasn't just a technical achievement. It was the product of a locker room that told her, repeatedly and in different ways, that her shot was worth taking. That's not something a coach can install with a play diagram. It grows from relationships, from the kind of steady encouragement that doesn't require a public forum to deliver. Clark's brief injury-related absence from the lineup, the stretch that culminated in her All-Star withdrawal, became a test of everything that culture had built. Young teams typically fracture under that kind of pressure. The structure that forms around a dominant personality tends to collapse when that personality is removed. Indiana didn't fracture. They tightened. Roles became sharper. Trust became more visible. The team that played without Clark looked not diminished, but defined, like a group that had internalized something about who they were that didn't depend on any single player to prove it. That doesn't happen accidentally. That happens because three people decided, maybe not consciously, just through the natural expression of who they are, to build something together that was bigger than their individual contributions.
There's a moment that captures all of this better than any statistic or award ceremony could. It's not a buzzer beater or a record-setting performance. It's quieter than that. It's Lexie Hull, days removed from losing Maggie, stepping onto the floor for All-Star Weekend with grief she hasn't finished processing and performing. Not surviving, performing. Shooting the ball with that same dialed-in precision that had earned her the selection in the first place. While somewhere in the building, Caitlin Clark was watching from the stands, and Sophie Cunningham was nearby doing what she always does, making sure nobody had to carry their weight alone. That image says more about what the Indiana Fever have built than anything on a stat sheet. A player showing up for her team through her own pain. A teammate cheering from a seat instead of the court because she loves the moment more than she needs to be in it. And a third player, somewhere in between, holding the whole thing together with the kind of quiet steadiness that only becomes visible when you look for it. This is what sports are capable of at their best. Not just the competition, not just the records, but the human architecture underneath it all. The relationships that make the wins feel meaningful and the losses survivable. Caitlin Clark will be back. That part isn't in question. A groin injury, properly treated and given time, is not a career-defining setback, especially not at 23. She'll return to the court with the same fearlessness she's always brought, and the story of her career will keep unfolding in ways that are probably impossible to predict right now. The WNBA is different because she's in it, and that won't change. But what happened during All-Star Weekend 2026, the withdrawal, the replacement, the grief, the social media posts, the 4 simple words from 2 teammates revealed something about Caitlin Clark that highlight reels don't always show. She is someone people go to bat for, not because of her fame or her statistics, but because of who she apparently is when the scoreboard doesn't matter. The kind of person who leaves a comment that says, "Love you," when her friend is hurting, who cheers loudest from a seat she didn't choose to be sitting in, and a third player, somewhere in between, holding the whole thing together with the kind of quiet steadiness that only becomes visible when you look for it. This is what Lexie Hull is capable of. As a person, she can step into a massive moment while quietly managing loss, and that the best thing her team ever gave her wasn't a better play to run. It was a group of people who made sure she never felt alone. And Sophie Cunningham, who may never be the name on the banner or the face on the billboard, but who has built something inside that locker room that no trade or off-season acquisition could replicate. She is the kind of teammate that championship teams remember decades later, not always by name in the box score, but in every room where former players sit and talk about what it was like to be part of something special. The Indiana Fever season isn't over. The standings are still being written, the games are still being played, and Caitlin Clark's return will add another chapter to a story that is already moving faster than anyone expected. But what All-Star Weekend 2026 showed us, quietly, in between the competition and the ceremony, is that the most powerful thing this franchise has built isn't a player, it's a culture. One where people show up for each other in the hard moments, where grief is acknowledged and not glossed over, where a nickname born from a dessert somehow manages to carry the weight of something genuinely important, where the bond between 3 women named Clark, Hull, and Cunningham became the emotional backbone of an entire organization. You can scout athletic ability, you can measure shooting percentage and defensive rating and court vision, but you cannot measure what happens when 3 people decide that what they're building together matters more than any individual piece of it. You cannot quantify the moment Lexie Hull stepped onto that all-star floor knowing her teammates had her back. You cannot put a number on Sophie Cunningham's instinct to protect the people around her, or on Caitlin Clark's choice to show up in a seat instead of a spotlight because the team needed her energy more than the crowd needed her performance. What the Indiana Fever have is rare, not just talent, heart. And in a league that is growing faster than it ever has before, in a city that fills stadiums and sells merchandise and argues about basketball with a passion that surprises even its own fans, heart might be the most important competitive advantage they have. Tres Leches isn't just a nickname, it's a philosophy. And right now, it's winning.